Welcome to Off the Grid, a podcast for small business owners who want to leave social media without losing all their clients.
Let's go off the grid. Okay. Let's go off the grid. Okay. I know that you really want to put your phone away. Yeah. Let's go off the grid.
Hello, and welcome to Off the Grid, a podcast about creative business, self-employment, and making money without social media. I'm Amelia Freeby. I am the founder of Softer Sounds Podcast Studio and the host of this here show, where I share stories, strategies, and experiments for running a successful, sustainable small business with radical generosity and energetic sovereignty. If you're new to Off the Grid, please head to the show notes and get the free Leaving Social Media Toolkit. That resource pairs with the first 4 episodes of the show, and it will introduce you to basically everything I know about marketing without social media. It's totally free. I think it's really fun, and you can get it at offthegrid.fun/toolkit or the link in the show notes. And if you're a returning listener, welcome back. I am so happy that you're here for season 4. And I think that you are going to be so happy that you tuned in today, because this week on the show, we are getting into it with everyone's least favorite internet friend, the algorithm. And to do that, I am joined by a very special guest. So let me introduce you to her. Kate Smalley is a small business advisor, educator, and facilitator based in Canada. Her work draws on 12 years of experience in marketing, 8 years of experience in personal finance, and ongoing study in systems thinking, emergence, non-dual consciousness, trauma recovery, and organizational development. She is certified as a qualified associate financial planner and a trauma of money method facilitator. And Kate helps her clients make ongoing growth decisions that honor them, their businesses, and their communities. She's interested in sustainable business, right-sizing your growth, values-based decision-making, and seeing your business as a garden, not a funnel. Basically, all the things we're interested in here at Off the Grid. So I'm really excited to have Kate with us today. Kate, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's such a joy to be here.
We are having this conversation today because of an email that you wrote. I feel like, I think I start a lot of episodes that way. I'm like, you wrote a great email. I said, come on the show. This is like a frequent theme at this stage in the podcast. But the email that you wrote was all about getting out of your algorithm. And I just found it really compelling. So I wanted to have you on to talk about algorithms, what they are, how they function, what are the benefits of them, what are the problems with them, and how might we get out of the algorithms that we feel stuck in. So that's what we'll be unpacking today. And I'm curious, could you start us off with like a very basic beginner question of like, what even is an algorithm?
I'll start with how I hold and see an algorithm, which might not be the basic Webster's definition.
Totally. And like, we're not computer scientists, people. We're not coming from that background at all. I would love to hear what an algorithm is to you.
So for me, when I think about an algorithm, I think about patterns and I think about predictability. So it feels like at its most basic, an algorithm is a process or a set of rules to help us figure something out, to help us operate or solve something. And what's important to me to note is I do not think algorithms are inherently bad. Like we easily equate algorithm equals social media, like we say social media equals marketing, but algorithms are inherently limiting. Like they help us figure something out. They help us get somewhere. And I think sometimes that's desirable and sometimes not so much. Like when it's consenting and anticipated and relevant, we love it. Like I love having a bus schedule. I like Google Maps. I like when I go to a bookstore and I say, hey, these are the last 2 books I read. What else would you recommend for me? Like to me, that's a version of an algorithm. I like that Netflix is like, I saw that you watched all of these mediocre rom-coms. Would you like another? And I'm like, yes. How did you know? But there's other sides of that where it's not anticipated or relevant or desirable, or we feel like we didn't like consent to it. And now we're just being bombarded with all of these things.
Yeah, I love all the aspects of algorithms that you're bringing up. And I love what you said. Like, we too easily equate algorithms with social media. They're totally not the same thing at all. And I went and read a whole book about algorithms to prepare for this conversation. And it had a lot of math in it. So I don't know that I would like recommend it to most readers, but I read this book. It was called Algorithms by Panos Louridas. And they make the argument that algorithms are just a way to solve a problem. And they highlight that algorithms existed before computers. We can actually see algorithms in musical rhythms. Like, there is a literal rhythm. It's exactly what you said with pattern recognition and predictability. And that's something we see in musical rhythms, right? Like, they're built off of patterns and predictability, and also of breaking that predictability and injecting it with like new, different things. And like that can be part of what draws us to certain types of music. So I found that really interesting. And just this reminder that algorithm does not equal computer, algorithm does not equal social media. Like, an algorithm is a method of solving a problem based in the patterns and predictability that you're mentioning. I do want to talk a little bit about the benefits of algorithms. I mean, I think the one that comes to mind most for me is like, algorithms save us so much time, especially when we use algorithms on computers. Like, what computers do is speed up the processing time. And we all benefit from that. I'm really glad that it's not somebody's job to like hand create the bus schedule every week. That would make life really slow moving, probably. But what are some of the benefits of algorithms that you see, or ways that you find algorithms beneficial in your life?
The two that come to mind for me are ease and possibility. So what you're saying about it really helps reduce our mental or cognitive load. Like, we're not having to make decisions all the time about everything. Like, some things get to be figured out more easily or for us or shown to us. And one of the really beautiful things about that is when you don't have to use your mental labor everywhere in your life, it does free up more for your creativity. Because you're like, I know I'm going to wake up, I'm going to go for this walk, I'm going to make this food, I'm going to put on these clothes. Like, it opens up your energy to be used on other things, which you might value more highly. And the other thing that I really think about is the world building component of it and the possibility of, like, I think of an example of someone, if you grew up in a really small town, or maybe it was conservative, and you were presented with really narrow ideas of here's how gender sexuality expresses, or here's what you can do with your life to make money. And then you get to go on the internet and you get to see this whole world of possibility that's like, oh, hey, you're interested in this, or you're curious about this. Did you know all of these other things exist? And it's like you come with one flower in the garden, and then you get to see this like whole other garden. You get to see these worlds of what else you could be or your life could be. Like, I think that's a really beautiful and generative way that we can use algorithms, is it just like opens us up and actually lets us access more of ourselves or express more of what we want to.
I think of even the very beginning days of Facebook. The algorithm there is basically just map a social network and suggest other connections to you, right? So it's saying, this person, you might know that person. These 8 people, you might know this 9th person, and like, when we map like interests and activities on that, you're kind of speaking to, oh, maybe I'm interested in reading Audre Lorde. So now it will recommend to me Angela Davis and Octavia Butler and, these other thinkers in that area. Like, we can follow these algorithms down really beautiful, expansive pathways and possibilities. And at the same time, a very similar algorithm, but with a slightly different purpose or problem it's been engineered to solve, can take you in like the opposite direction toward a more like constrictive, restrictive, oppressive mentality or information or people.
And it's like, you never, especially with online algorithms, you never know where the tipping point is. It's really hard to know what the satiation point, like, when are you full? And I feel the best when that example of like, oh, I read this book and now I'm being told you might like this. And I'm like, amazing, put a hold, I'm done. Or I got to like find out about a new concert. Awesome. But it's hard to know when you're like done or full, and it can just kind of keep going. And then you feel sort of
Yeah, I love you're bringing this lens of enoughness or too muchness, or this lens of like consumption. There's a way that these algorithms designed to always recommend the next thing. They are always pushing us to do more, consume more, read more, watch more, listen to more. And I think like in those instances to keep us on the platforms that they serve, right? Listen to this next song on Spotify so you stay on Spotify. Buy this next book from Barnes & Noble so that we get a little more money from you. And I would say like Barnes & Noble or Amazon particularly, I'll have way better recommendation algorithms than my local library does. As much as I love my library and I check out books all the time, I don't go there for book discovery because I'm not finding that like easy, algorithmically oriented surfacing of possibilities, I suppose. I want to talk about maybe one more thing before we get into the sort of like getting out of your algorithm or feeling stuck in your algorithm feeling. And I want to go back to talking about like algorithms on social media, particularly for small business owners. So with an algorithm, it's important to start with the problem. Like, what is the problem that you want to solve? And then in most like data-centric models, we go get a bunch of data related to that problem. And then what the algorithm is it's like this series of steps. It's like calculations and processing. And like the algorithm's job is to like transform that data into a solution to our problem. And something that the author of this book says, they write, when we try to find an algorithm to solve our problem, we should check that our problem meets the requirement of the algorithm. Otherwise, the algorithm will not work. But note that an algorithm cannot tell us that it doesn't work. If we implement the algorithm on a computer, it will still execute its steps, even if it does not make sense to do so. It will produce an answer that will be nonsense, and it is up to us to make sure we are using the right tool for the right job.
When it's something like I'm opening Google Maps, or I'm looking at a bus schedule, or I'm using my calculator, I have a really well-defined problem. But when you go on the internet or you open social media, you're not going in with like, oh, here's a task that I want to solve. It's so open-ended. And you don't really get the experience of a closed loop of like, oh, I need to add up how much revenue I'm making this month. Oh, great, I get the answer. It's just endless. Like it keeps going. You don't really have the satisfaction of I've figured something out. It's just like endless and all of this information is there and it gets so murky and messy.
So I think I've been pretty convinced by The Social Dilemma, the documentary and the film, as well as just my general observations of how VC-funded businesses work more broadly, that social media platforms need to always be making more money. Like that's what their, mission is to a certain extent.
Well, it's their business model. It has to be more attention, more eyeballs, more time on the app, because that's how they keep the machine running.
Exactly. So they have to make more money. And the way they do that is through having people spend more time on the app so they can sell more dollars to advertisers. So like the problem that those algorithms are built around is how to keep people on the app. And I think that if we go back to like what an algorithm is and we center it in that problem and we remember that the purpose of social media algorithms is to keep us on the apps, and the data that algorithm is fed is literally every single user's behavior and interactions on the app. When I think of it that way, I'm like, why did I ever think that would be an environment where like I could do good business? Like there's nothing about that problem or that data set that suggests that this app is going to help me make money.
Why is that true for you?
These apps are not programmed to make money for the user of the app. That is not at all part of what the algorithm is intended to do. So I think that the business success people have seen on the apps is a byproduct, like a nice benefit of some of the other things that the app is doing, but that is not at all its purpose. Like we've been able to kind of make it work for us if we do certain things, but it's not in the algorithm's interest, in the social media company's business's interest for me to make money. Like this is the major problem I see for small business owners. But what are the problems that you see with the algorithms on social media in the context of small business or any other context?
Well, I think like what I said near the beginning, that algorithms aren't inherently bad, but they are inherently limiting. And I think one of the problems can be when it's limiting in an undesirable way and it makes our world too small. And we're really caught in these like very tight, closed loop. I'm drawing a circle with my finger, but you're kind of like grooving this path. And I think on the personal side and maybe the business side as well, that can show up as us being more judgmental of ourselves and others and more biased. And on the business side, I think we can be served this really like tight and narrow idea of what it means to be a business owners and how things work. And oh my gosh, something I know I've heard you talk about on the podcast that like to succeed, put that in air quotes, at social media is a different game than being a successful business owner. Success defined by profitable or sustainable, or you feel good about what you're doing, like the things that you have to do to sort of win on social media. It's not the same thing as running a business. So it's really distracting. And it encourages you to feed a machine that is not necessarily what is going to help your business grow because you're not a social media influencer whose business model is predicated on advertising and eyeballs.
Yeah, I think that the social media algorithms are all designed around attention. And there are actually very few business models where attention is what is like constantly at stake or the only lever for making money. We need community. We need relationships. We need to send proposals. We need to, do so many other things. It's not simply about attention. Whereas I feel like at a certain point on social media, it all boils down to that because the core mission of these apps is to like monetize users' attention to make money for sponsors that are paying for their content or their services or their products and offerings to be promoted on the app. Like that's the monetization model. That's what social media is doing.
A thing I see working with small business owners is if you spend a lot of time on social media, you can get a very narrow idea of what business is or what it takes to succeed in business. And I find it make our world smaller in the sense that we're like less creative and we're not able to see outside of it, even to see, as we've mentioned already, you talk about on the show, like marketing does not equal social media. Social media is just like one little section of what all of marketing is. But being on social media can like eclipse all of that. And I think it can really reduce our ability to think creatively and to think critically and to really see this like whole field of options. When we're on this app, we just see this one thing in front of us. And I think that's really detrimental. And that's what leads me to take breaks from social media when I notice that I'm not as creative and I feel like I can't think critically. And when I feel like I can't see myself critically and everything's getting passed through this really small lens, that's when I know like, whoa, I need to step back and touch grass, as people say. Like I need to not be engaging with this because I'm having such a limiting idea of what it is to be a creative person in the world and on the internet, honestly, and what it is to be a business owner.
Yeah. So is that how you would describe being stuck in your algorithm then? Is that what that means to you?
Being stuck in my algorithm to me really does feel like being limited in an undesirable way. And I'm not being surprised and delighted anymore. Like I will notice things like, God, I haven't listened to any new music recently or read a new book or gone to a concert that kind of surprised me because I'm not really being open to new sources of information or new ideas. To me, and I think everyone will have different guardrails around it, and I can feel it in my body. It kind of feels like I'm withering and I don't feel as much like vitality literally in my body. And I don't feel as much creativity. I don't have as many ideas. Creative expression is so core to who I am. And I also built my work and how my business works around my own creative expression. So when I notice that feels limited, sometimes that shows up with being really fearful, what's going to happen if I say this or share this? Are people going to judge me? Like I'm worried about something bad is going to happen because perhaps I've seen a lot of examples of that. That's when I know I kind of need to disconnect or open myself up to something Right.
Yeah, what I'm hearing you say, like one way I would parse it is that if algorithms are about patterns and predictability, as where you started, they're going to produce a lot of sameness. They're going to say, you liked this, so you'll probably like this. It's like a slight step away from this thing that you liked. They're not programmed to introduce real difference or like anything radical into the system. But I think that creativity thrives on that like nourishing generative difference. It thrives on kind of rubbing up against something that's like a little weird or a little wild, and then like figuring out how to engage with that or bring that into your world, or like reject it entirely and like notice that like not for you-ness actually generates something new about what is for you. And I feel like, to me, that stuckness, like feeling stuck in an algorithm, I can relate to that sense of withering. And also I will get a sort of general kind of like malaise of boredom. Like nothing is surprising and delighting, as you said, but I suppose you could write an algorithm that is designed to like pop up really weird and different things, like that is designed to like totally throw extreme difference into your field of view. I think you could write an algorithm to do that. Maybe that's the sort of like, if you throw back to old internet, like stumbled upon vibe, right? Of just like, let me stumble upon something totally weird. I don't think that's actually how that algorithm is made. I think it's more like randomness, perhaps, than like, let me make this really different than the things that I noticed that you're looking at. But still, I think that's a piece of it. It's like, if algorithms are about predictability, but we're craving difference, like or something radically different than what we typically look at, we actually want to go to spaces that are not so algorithmically defined to find that.
I love that you're bringing that up. And what's standing out to me is, what are we needing or wanting? And then what are the spaces we're going to find it? And like, we're going to social media as a watering hole, but we want to be fed with something that doesn't live there.
And I think that for small business owners, often we go to social media with this vague sense of like, I need clients or customers. And because we're like at the general watering hole, we're like, well, my clients and customers are surely there. But I would say like nothing about the algorithm on social media, like its job is not to bring you customers. So you have to always keep that in mind. Like, yes, you're going to the place where your clients and customers might be, but I see a lot of business owners be like, well, the algorithm is working against me. But I think it's actually just like, it's just not built for you. It has no interest in what you're trying to do here. Its only job is to keep you on the app. And so I think if you choose to use social media, you have to keep that in mind at all times, especially if you're trying to use it for business.
Yes, I always encourage people, and I regularly have to remind myself, like, if you're going to use social media, be intentional about what it's for you, so that those expectations are there and in alignment.
And I would say, like, don't have expectations for what the algorithm will do for you, because again, it's like not there to serve you clients. If only it was, right? Give me the app that gives me clients. But I think like this is where we've really just seen this in the evolution of social media. Because I've talked to people on the show like Liz Migliarelli on this season, or Cody Parrott in past seasons, right? Where it was like in the past, when an app like Instagram was just trying to get more users, it was doing a lot more generous, like sharing of traffic and pointing traffic in all directions. I think kind of to anyone who proved that they could attract and keep people on the app. But I think that in my observation, at least, that has really shifted. And it's more about sending that traffic to pay for play users, people who are paying for it. And so we can't bring our 2015 expectations for the algorithm to 2024 Instagram. We will only be disappointed if we try to do that. And I think the other piece of what you're saying is like, yes, know what you are doing on social media, what you expect to happen from that, and be measuring if it's working. And make sure that what you're measuring are metrics that matter to you, right? Like, your business does not run on likes and comments. Unless you are an influencer, likes and comments are not the currency of your business, because influencers sell likes and comments and number of followers. They sell that to advertisers. Like, that's what they're selling. That is their currency to some extent. But if you're a service provider, if you're a product maker, you cannot take your likes, comments, and followers to the bank. So I think being super clear about what are the metrics that matter for you and how are you measuring them, so that you know that like if what you're going to social media for, if it's actually working for that at all. Hello, my lovely listener. Amelia here, interrupting this amazing conversation, because if you're enjoying this episode the one you're listening to right now, I think you would really love the Off the Grid Clubhouse. The Clubhouse is a paid podcast, newsletter, and asynchronous community space for friends and fans of Off the Grid hosted on Substack. It's where I share my monthly biz forecasts, bonus episodes about my hot takes, personal feelings, deepest, darkest, brightest, lightest ideas about online business, and more. I also send out a monthly link roundup called The Click Through, where I gather everything that I have been reading, watching, and intrigued by with regards to internet culture, social media happenings, and online business at large. That's also where I have been chronicling the many, many, many announcements I see lately of people taking breaks from social media or exiting platforms entirely. And all of the posts in the Clubhouse have community comment threads where you can ask me questions, share your experiences, and chat with other Off the Grid listeners. It only costs $5 per month or $50 per year to join the fun, and I truly hope that you will head to the show notes and check it out. I look forward to seeing you on Substack, but for now, let's dive back into this conversation. So when you get stuck in your algorithm, and you feel that sense of withering and you start to notice red flag feelings. Like if all of a sudden I have all this anxiety where I'm like, where is this coming from? Or like this fear suddenly like creeps up around like everything I'm sharing, I'm worried about it getting like super critiqued or something from the external world. Like when those red flag feelings start to arise, when you realize you've been stuck in your algorithm, what are ways that you get out of it? What are some of your like solutions for that feeling or next steps for getting out of that feeling?
So when I'm feeling stuck, a helpful thing to remind myself of is if I want something different, it helps to do something different. So what you were saying before, which I love that you put language to it, that the job of an algorithm is pretty much to offer us up more of the same. And like, based on where I see you are right now, oh, I think you would like this also. And when we're feeling stuck in our algorithm, or for me, when I'm feeling kind of like withered and I don't have that creativity or that openness, then that signals to me I need to do things or put myself in environments where I get to be delighted and surprised. Oh my gosh, also experiencing any sort of reverence or awe, like, when you're just genuinely in awe of something, like that's such a good signal to me that I am out of my algorithm. So I look at really practical things, which is honestly similar advice I would give around how to be creative or think more creatively, is look at things that you're already doing every day and do them differently. So walk a different route, or if you often take the bus, try walking or try driving. Like take things that are already in your daily routine. I'll especially do this if I'm going through a period where my mental health isn't great or I don't have a lot of energy. Like I'll choose something that I'm already doing and just make it a little bit different. Like instead of walking the same route every morning, I'll walk a different route. And that lets me be surprised because I might discover something different. And the kind of classic advice of going to a bookstore or something in person, or reading a newspaper, or picking up some sort of pamphlet or flyer that says all of the concerts that are on nearby. And then you get to discover something that you normally wouldn't.
I mean, I love these examples. And I think what they speak to is that there's like a sort of double-edged sword nature of algorithms for us, right? Like algorithms are efficient at recognizing patterns and predicting how to solve our problems. So that's great, right? Like I want the Google Maps algorithm to tell me the fastest way to get from here to wherever I'm going. And also, sometimes when I've driven that way a million times, I then need to just like inject some difference into the system. I literally need to go the long way to where I'm going, or I need to go on foot, or I need to take the bus, or I need to ride my bike instead of driving this path in my car that I have ingrained in my system. Some days I need to go on autopilot and just drive the same path I've always been, and other days I need something else. And I think that this is where like algorithms both, they save us like time and energy, and like that's beautiful. And then on the other hand, they can leave us feeling stuck in like, now there's just like the one most efficient way to do the thing. And that's how I always do the thing. And I need to change. Like that needs to change for me to feel excited and enthusiastic again about going to this place all the time, driving to work every day. Like I need to feel like a fresh sense of something else is possible here. And so I love that it's kind of like we want to appreciate the benefits of the algorithm, but then also have these sort of corrective or curative activities that like bring us back to our most like creative selves, perhaps.
What stood out to me there is being purposely inefficient,
Mm-hmm.
like doing that on purpose, the value in that. And another thing I think of too, when I get stuck and my world gets small, I can be more judgmental. It really helps to open myself up to different perspectives. So even if you always go to the independent local coffee shop, like go to a Starbucks, go to a chain and see what that's like to experience, especially if you're judgmental of people that do that, and see like, oh, what might be the benefit or the nice thing in this. And there's something to me about trying on different ways of being and trying on different perspectives or different ways of life, or maybe listening to something that you normally wouldn't, or going to some in-person thing that you normally wouldn't. And that can like pop me out of my algorithm really quickly because I'm opened up to this whole new world.
So I think, I mean, really, we're just talking about how to inject like newness and creative vitality into our lives again. I'm thinking too of like ways that we do this even online, because when you and I are moving very fluidly between like algorithm as like the pattern recognition my own brain does, all the way to the level of like the very advanced algorithms that have been created to recommend content on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, wherever you might be, right? And there's a huge spread in between. That's a wide spectrum of algorithms and what they are. And I think that I love these like examples you're giving of ways to break our own ingrained patterns and habits as ways to inject that newness and creative vitality into our lives. And sometimes I think about that online as well, right? Like sometimes I will go search something in incognito mode so that I'm not just getting directed toward all the same things I always get directed toward, or so that like Google isn't quite so clearly surfacing all the same sorts of things. I also like to spend time on platforms that are still more human curated. So I'm thinking here of like my love of podcasting. A lot of that comes from the fact that, you know, I use Apple Podcasts or Pocket Casts, and those platforms are still human curated. Now, that doesn't mean there's no algorithms on them. Like if you scroll to the bottom of any show you're subscribed to an Apple Podcast, it will recommend other shows. I'm sure that an algorithm is doing that because I am positive there's no one at Apple going through literally the millions of shows on their platform and hand selecting the recommendations like that. Like I'm sure there's an algorithm that's noticing if you listen to this, you'll probably listen to these things, right? But the browse functionality in Apple Podcasts, that is all curated by humans. They select the categories, they put people in them. The charts are algorithmically determined by a combination of downloads in a certain number of time and other factors that Apple has not told us about. But I find that I prefer to spend time in online spaces where there is some degree of human curation still happening, because I will see things that I would never see otherwise. And so podcasting is one of those examples for me. It's particularly why I like to be on Apple Podcasts and not on Spotify as well, because Spotify is much more algorithmically driven. But I also think of a platform like Are.na, which is a space where people are building boards connected of things. I've been on Are.na for years and years, and I love that there is some functionality that will like surface recommendations. They have an explore tab, but I just find so much interesting different stuff there, as opposed to a platform like Pinterest, which is always serving me more of the same. It's like, oh, you liked those orange shoes. Here are 800 more pairs of orange shoes. Like, so that's another way I think I would say, like, digitally, that I work to get out of my algorithm is, my little like incognito mode hack to get a little bit out of Google's search ranking, and to use these platforms that still center human curation, at least in certain areas of the content that they're sharing and how they share it.
One of my joys on the internet right now, there's a platform called Sublime, which is quite similar to Are.na. And they email you 5 p.m. every Friday one of your cards. So one of the things that you have saved. And I love it. I love the combination of the predictability of this happens at 5 p.m. every Wednesday. It is something that I curated to my library at some point. So it's not totally random, but then I'm surprised and delighted by this quote that I completely forgot about, or this book that I read and loved. And that to me is such a happy middle ground of being surprised and delighted, but it's not entirely random.
Yeah, it's like being reminded, which is a different functionality, I think. And I would say, I think Are.na has introduced a similar email, because I get one, I think it's on Sundays, that surfaces for me like 2 blocks that I've saved in the past, some blocks from like people I follow, and then some totally random ones from people I don't follow. And I know folks who also really love Readwise, which does this similarly with like links that you've saved or highlights from different books and things. And Readwise will send you digests that like resurface the things and remind you of it over time. And again, this can be done by an algorithm. Algorithms might be choosing those things, but the problem they're solving is more about like reminding and like sparking that memory of like, oh yeah, I did appreciate this, than it is about like keeping you on Are.na longer, which is never something I feel when I'm on the app. Like, I go down rabbit holes there because I want to, but it feels pretty easy to get popped off of that app when I click through a link or go somewhere else as well. Partially because I use it primarily as a web browser, so that impacts the experience as well.
Gosh, I love it. I think this is going to be one of my takeaways from this conversation, is asking myself, like, what is the problem this is solving for me when I engage with something personally on the internet, and especially in my business. I've been thinking about that a lot lately in terms of what I feel like my role is. Like, what is my role as someone who sends emails or a newsletter or who blogs or who does use social media? And when I'm clear about that, and I'm clear about the expectations I have with myself and my own personal sense of responsibility, it's way easier for me to show up, because it's really clear for me, this is for this and it's not for this. And what you're saying of like, I know how to measure success and I have my own metrics for that. And I'm not confused that part of, I don't believe that it's Instagram's job to show my content to all my followers, because I know that's not what they're doing. But when we get really understandably bound up about that, of like, what the heck, but that's not actually the functionality of the platform, at least not anymore.
I think many of us feel like it's what we were promised, or we feel like it's what the platform should do. And I agree with you that our work is to identify what is the problem I want to solve. And then if we're going into spaces that are heavily algorithmically defined, like, what is the problem I think their algorithm is solving? And can I find any points of like connection or alignment between those things? And if you can't, I would guess that your time spent in that space is going to be pretty dissatisfying for you, because you're, again, asking this platform to solve a problem for you that it seems evident they're not really that interested in solving. But even when that happens, like, what I don't want people to take away is like, oh, so it's just my fault that Instagram didn't work for me. Like, that's actually not what I want people to take away at all. What I want you to take away is like a better acuity to assess what algorithms on different platforms are trying to do, and then to decide if you want to opt in or out of that. We are smart enough to see through, and we can choose to act in alignment in different ways, and we can make intentional choices even among like the algorithm itself.
Yes. And there's so many options for you as a small business owner. And it's really hard, I think, by insidious design to see that when you're on a social platform. That's why I love what you do with Off the Grid. There's so many other ways to build the business and community or lead projects or express yourself creatively. Like Instagram and social media as a whole is just one tiny, tiny thing. And if you don't want to use it, or if it doesn't work for you for any reason, that has no bearing on you as a person, your value, your worth, your business, your success. Like there's so many other things that you can put your energy to. And that would actually, it's like working in two totally different directions. Like you're trying to swim upstream. And like there's probably a place somewhere where you could be more carried by the river. Like you could be in the same direction and using tools or in a place that aligns with your values. And it's unfortunate. And I really do think by design that we cannot see that when we're so in these platforms, because they just want to keep us there by all costs.
And I think it goes back to what we've both been saying this entire time. Like so much of this is the skill of like identifying what your problem is and what you need for your business to be successful and what successful means to you. Like it really starts with us being able to ask and answer our own questions, because I think that it's really easy to get on that slippery slope that I mentioned earlier of I need clients or customers. Everybody seems to be on social media, so I'll go find them there. But that's where you're swimming upstream, as you mentioned. That's where you feel like the algorithm is working against you. And there are so many other ways to solve this problem of I need clients and customers. Social media, I believe, is rarely the best solution to that problem. And it doesn't mean it's not the best solution for some people. But if you're listening to this podcast, it's probably not the best solution for you, because it probably just makes you feel bad, which means it's not the right solution for you.
Yeah. And for me as a small business advisor, generally, I'm very nervous if someone only relies on social media, because it is so far out of your control and a bit of a hamster wheel and something that you have to generally consistently feed. Like it's not really something that continues to work for you. You kind of have to keep feeding it for it to potentially work. So even if it works for you in some context, if that's the only thing someone's relying on, that always makes me nervous.
Yeah, absolutely. Another trap I think people fall into is like when an algorithm does work for you, it can work really fast. That was one of the benefits of algorithms we talked about at the beginning, like is their speed. And sometimes if you're used to things working at algorithm speed, at computer processing speed, strategies that operate at a much slower pace, like relationship marketing, can feel pretty dissatisfying because you're like, this is taking so long. But in my experience, those slower strategies have just had much greater depth and longevity for my business than the more algorithmic strategies that I've pursued. So for instance, I spent time and money trying to build on Pinterest. And while it has brought people into my business ecosystem, they have not been people that have spent money or become longtime clients. Whereas almost every time I'm working on building relationships, that eventually leads me toward contracts and clients of some variety.
Yes, the pacing piece and the expectation that it might take a long time. And in some ways, I feel kind of grateful that I sort of fell into self-employment and freelancing and contract work. So I didn't go into it really steeped in online business culture and promises of you'll get to this number in 3 months and 3x this, and it's just this, and then that happened. Like my career has been a very slow build. And consistently blogging. And then 2 years later, I have a conversation with someone who's like, I read this thing that you wrote and it really stuck with me, but it can take a year or 2 years for that to come around. Or I meet someone in person at a coffee shop randomly, and then you actually build a relationship and it might lead to something and it might not. So it has been a very slow build, but that works for my personality and what I'm trying to build.
That really resonates with me as well. I'm just constantly thinking about pace and when it's important to go slow and when it's possible to go fast, and how I support myself in moving between those modes. And so much of the game, as I'm often reminded by longtime business owners, is just staying in business. And that can happen in so many different ways. I think about my recent episode on self-employment as a spectrum. Like sometimes staying in business looks like getting a part-time job so that you don't have to shutter your business entirely. Sometimes staying in business looks like pausing new clients for 12 months and just like trying to make it work. Sometimes staying in business looks like hiring 3 people because you have a sudden influx of contracts and you like need the support so you don't burn out and quit. And whether you're working fast or slow, like there's just so much that we have to do to make our businesses sustainable for us. And I think during slow times, so much of it is just connecting with like if we want to keep this thing going and how we can do that, and then answering those questions. So not exactly about algorithms, but I just think that, like algorithms just, they fuck with our expectation for how long things should take. And it's important to recognize that for ourselves when we're putting expectations on how fast something should work, I think.
100%. Or that there are these really tidy, tight, 3-step linear solutions to things in business. And that if we haven't been able to figure that out, we're somehow bad or wrong, and we're never going to figure this out. In my experience and people I work with, I'm sure other people are different. That's not the case. There's so much uncertainty and trying things, and the ability to stay somewhat open and treat it as an experiment and make educated guesses of like, I'm going to try this because I think I might like it and this might work. And just to be able to keep going, what you're saying, like setting yourself up to be able to keep staying in business. And for me, honestly, I hope to always be able, like, I love that right now I happen to be getting paid to do things I would do anyways, like have conversations about business, study interesting things, and then talk about them, like write about it. I imagine I'll always do that, whether it's my job or not. And if I can't make a living from it, I'll figure out something else.
So Kate, if folks are interested in working with you in any capacity or keeping up with your work, where should I send them? What's the best way to stay in touch?
So the best way to stay in touch is through my newsletter, which you can sign up for on my website. It's at the bottom of katesmalley.com, or you can go to katesmalley.com/mail. I write there pretty much every other week about creativity and business and being more yourself in your business, and just the whole journey that we've talked a little bit about here of building something that really honors you and other people and the things that you care about.
Beautiful. Well, we'll link to all of that in the show notes. Thank you, Kate, for having this conversation with me about algorithms. Thank you, listeners, for joining us and considering how you might get out of your algorithm, or at least get out of feeling stuck in particular social media algorithms. And I feel like it's especially poignant to say this at the end of this episode, but until next time, we will see you off the grid. Thanks for listening to Off the Grid. Don't forget to grab your free Leaving Social Media toolkit at offthegrid.fun/toolkit. This podcast is a Softer Sounds production. Our music is by Melissa Caitlin Carter of Making Audio Magic, and our logo is by Natelier Studio. I'm your host, Amelia Ruby, and until next time, I'll see you off the grid and on the interweb.
Let's go off the grid. Okay. Let's go off the grid. Okay. I know that you really